Well, I was talking in a couple of videos about my memoir that I've been working on, my book. I mean, when you have a real reader life and you're a writer, it's just all connected. And here's the school bus in Canyoncito, New Mexico, in 1924. Crazy. The little church is still there. It's so small that on Saints' days, the priest just stands in the doorway and everyone stands outside. There's an 1890s cemetery nearby that I have many memories of. Now I know a lot about from my friend Dennis Lucero, who grown up there in the 30s. Super, one of the coolest people I interviewed and got to talk with. We hung out all the time when I was working on my book. I'm like, this guy's awesome. He told me that his grandfather one day, when a long time ago, just went and dug up an ancestor's skeleton from the cemetery to take the skull home. And he was all, you could do whatever you wanted back then. Oh man. I think that skull ended up on the hearth of the Penitente Morada in San Antonio, New Mexico. The San Antonio in the Sandia Mountains. That's a commonplace name. And there's a more famous San Antonio, New Mexico down by Socorro, where Conrad Hilton, the famous hotelier, got his start. Supposedly there's a barn down there with his name still carved in it. When I was reading My Struggle, he mentioned Hilton Hotels, a Hilton Hotel in Norway, and I was like, well, I guess that's the connection I have to that world. So I always thought one approach to nonfiction is to create such a huge mythology and how you present the world that everyone can find their place within it. That is a cool thing when you can be like, oh, I have this connection to this work. I've been to Hilton's house and seen the site of the first hotel in New Mexico, and here's this guy writing about it in Norway. On one level, who cares? The little reminders of our interconnectedness are very cool and very literary. I'm going to click on it. Now we're back. In the first video, I looked at the epigrams, chapter 0 there, that's a chapter of all other people's quotes. In chapters 1, 2, 3, 5. Where did that one stop? Holy the Fall, I think it was the first 7, yeah. Then in the next one, I looked at Dear People Who Want Me Gone, some interstitial. Into the Wild or wherever, I don't know. The unfinished chapter, The Endless Winter, or Soldaten and Oral History. I'm starting to look at The World Greening Wildly. I think that's where we were. As you can see, it's chapter 11 of 26, but then there's that chapter 0 also, so that's there's 27 chapters in the first book, 33 in the second. Together there's 60. The 60 minutes of an hour, the hour that life is. It's but a poor player that struts and frets and all that biz. You know how it's always doing that. I'm all alive. Cut it out. Enough strutting and fretting already. Give me a break. Isn't it about time that you're heard no more, Isn't that the next line? We get the idea. Strutting, fretting. Yeah. Okay, so in the book's chronology, and then the chronology of the events this covers, this is the third of the 4 Alaska chapters. There's Into the Wild or wherever, I don't know. That is about going up there and commercial fishing and being disillusioned. And then Soldaten, or The Endless Winter, or Soldaten and Oral History, which is the only unfinished chapter of book 1. And that one is about just a really long, pretty depressing winter. But it doesn't seem so depressing in people's recounting. There's a lot of community and event and, laughter. It's pretty interesting to hear people's memories. But The World Greening Wildly, I wrote this one working a late night home care job, watching over these 3 mentally disabled individuals. And I wrote what else? Oh, the one after this, Pentagram, also. And I was really into like Aleppo, like numerical meaning and structure in writing at that time. And Aleppo is an interesting group that did that stuff. But I was into that before I heard about them. But then I heard about them and I was further inspired. And, I'm just like, put symbolism and meaning into your work in every way you can, Structure is beautiful, limits are generative. Who doesn't love symmetry? Golden ratio, spirals, math, the elegance of being. So in this essay, what did I do? How did I write this one? Oh, the form of this is kind of a, I often say like every book chapter of my book has a different form, and the form is dictated by the content. But some of the forms they're not like as easily described. Like it's a comic book, it's a script, it's whatever, They're not like that. Some are like what they call hermit crab essays, where it's like takes the form of something like one chapter's liner notes to an album. But the liner notes go off and they're all emotional, And but this chapter's form is something that's always expanding and contracting, because I thought of the world as kind of pulsing and alive at the time, and this like very green. This is about spring in Alaska, and like so it's about like the most earned spring ever. And it follows, that first chapter that experiments with half third person, half first person. Third person when it's about my past self, first person when it's about my present self. Meditates on all the different selves we are. And then the oral history one, I'm kind of like nothing and nobody. I'm just a you and other people's words. And I even cut out like very specific references to my appearance and like identity, etc., so that it can be a really blank you for the readers in the oral history words of other people. Done 3 out of those 10 interviews, and I got to do the rest and transcribe them. See a previous video on this subject for more on that. But this one is really like a return to self, and it's about coming back to life, and it's about expanding and contracting, and about how even those efforts are often stumbling and fumbling. Starts out with this 11-word sentence, and real simple. I lived in the woods and then left to go traveling. Not the best sentence, but it's just real basic. And then those clauses are split apart, and they begin and end every clause that follows, but they double in length for a while. And for the first half, they focus on the first half. I lived in the woods. And then the second half, they focus on the second half, and then left to go traveling. It's a really cool structured piece. I really put a lot of thought into this one. And some of them are just crap. No, this is, but no, in this one, I really gave a lot of thought to the form and spent a lot of time with it. And so it just keeps expanding. I lived in the woods and then left to go traveling. I lived in the woods, spruce and birch woods, in a tent, in a clearing in Alaska, and left to go traveling. Lived in the woods about 3 miles outside of Soldotna, an often frozen over strip mall town of dirty parking lots and fast food signage, the 4,000-person half-government Alaskan town in which I had spent the previous winter going literally insane, and then left to go traveling. Shoot. So, and then it just keeps doubling, and it keeps focusing on that first half, and it's about living in the woods, which really was a unique time. I mean, I went insane in the cabins, and I had to move out. I was like, I gotta be outside. And moved into a tent. This is the one I came to Alaska for, this young idealist who's joining us. Hi, Prisma. How you doing? So kitty, you're so pretty. Oh, look at those eyes. What a face. You're just so gorgeous. What a kid. She can't help it. She's a queen. She is. She's just I feel like, cats, if you really get to know their personalities, they just have something really wild and dignified. So it keeps doubling, and it was this eventful time. It was still cold. Moose would come stand by my fire. I had some bear scares. Some creepy stuff happened. I mean, some interesting stuff happened. Some good times. I read The Possessed by Dostoevsky. And then, so then it gets halfway through, and it has this huge long section, and the middle section, which is the longest of any part, has both halves and focuses on the front half and on the back equally, and starts and ends with that same clause. And then for the second half, it gets smaller and smaller and cuts in half until it ends back again with that same sentence. It's kind of cool. This one got published in a literary journal out of Michigan. Had a nice print edition that I sadly gave all my copies away. I don't have it anymore. I think it was called the 3284 or something. I don't know. But there was some good fiction and nonfiction in that issue I was in. That's the thing with literary journals. They make you realize, there's, if they're done right, there's people out there making good work. But there's nothing like the thriving literary journal world that, like, the French New Wave knew. I mean, there's cool zines and all kinds of things, but exchanges of ideas, I don't know. People are working on stuff. Everyone's doing their own thing. The best of us will never stop working because we live for it. That sounds arrogant, but it's like, why would you commit your life to an art and not, like, care about it immensely and want to be the best? That piece is followed up by the fourth and final Alaskan essay in the section North. And I love a one-word title if you can get away with it. And I had a really good reason for calling this one Pentagram. In part, it starts with the story of my hippie girlfriend when I was like 19 or 20, and I lived in this little shanty next to a waterfall in Seward, Alaska, and it was amazing. Like, the door was a fishing net. There was a wooden platform inside it. Whoever built this, it was just great. And it was right next to a huge waterfall, and it was just amazing. I had a dog. Anyway, there was this like Wiccan pentagram nearby, and it used to really freak us out. We had both been like raised religious, and we were like, why is that right there? And we knew it was from this drifter guy named Ed who was nearby from there, and we'd run into him many times. And we would like take it apart and throw it in the stream, because I think it was just residual being raised religious or something, like whatever. Anyway, and it would always be like back in place in the morning. It was creepy. I don't know if Ed was doing it in the middle of the night or the woods. But this essay is written like a pentagram. It's written in 5 sections of 3, and each of the subsections, the word count, the percentage of how much is there corresponds to the angles of a pentagram. And I really figured it out. So it's pretty exact. And so that gives it a unique and weird structure. And I also made it, the sections are named after places, and you can plot out a pentagram on a map by having the dots of all of them. Seward is one. Anyway. Yeah, this is another late night home care job. When I was writing this one, some guy tried to poison me with Windex. He got wild sometimes. Yeah, like that guy had his hands around my throat at least once. That jeez. Crazy jobs. But the real damage from that job was I turned nocturnal. I became like a bat person. My skin turned gray. Anyway, sorry, I just was plunged into revelry remembering that. But yeah, this one is about hitchhiking out of Alaska, hitchhiking up to as far north as the roads would go in Canada, and then hitchhiking down south. And I just really had some weird adventures. And it ends on an unresolved moment. and like just lets the reader be like, the lady or the tiger. So that's cool. Or The End of Limbo. That's a good movie by John Sayles. But I like this chapter a lot. One time when the filmmaker Sarah Century was staying at my old house, and her cinematographer, I read the parts of this essay, and people were like into it. It was cool. Because I was working on it. Anyway, all right, oh, that's pentagram. Jeez, I'm all moving slow. So then we're into the next section, West Interstitial. That's what I call this part. So all the sections start with these 4-page, half-page formatted like this column. So the column will always be on the outside of the page. It repeats the name twice of the section, West. And it just kind of like explains to people what's going on and says, you're doing good. Keep reading, like here's, like, I feel like most people aren't idiots. Most people can read something that has a little bit of fun challenge to it as long as they know what's going on. I'm haunted by Chris Rock saying that like mostly when a joke doesn't work, it's because the premise hasn't been properly set up. I'm like, yeah, that's really true. And that just goes for all things in art. You just got to like establish what you need to establish, and then you can pull anything off. Right, Prismo? Prismo is so wise. Yep. It's true. Yeah, and whenever I get to a chapter, I bold it. So I'm like, yeah. So that's the interstitial section. And then I really like this essay. This one was published in the Concho River Review. And it's a good little journal. And this was playing with form in a different way. And I wanted to be like, how minimally can I apply an idea of form? Because you could call this a hermit crab essay on one level, and I've never loved that term. It seems too cutesy wootsy. But there are a couple anthologies now, at least one, of hermit crab essays, and that term is out there in the creative nonfiction world. But I was writing it before I heard that term, where you basically like take a form, and I was like, oh, it would be funny. Like we always were having to read these instructions. I could write it like it's instructions for how to build a playground and use that metaphorically while talking about this time in my life when I was building playgrounds. And and then here's how minimally I applied it. I numbered it 1 through 3, and I kind of start out with the idea of, let me show you. Building a playground is easy as long as you know how. You just have to find people who know how already and then learn from them. See? Easy. Except just make sure you find the right people. That's important. And make sure you learn the right things. That's important too. And this essay is about traveling around the West with these 3 dysfunctional brothers that were just always fighting. And pretty unique people, all of them. Unique, troubled people. And we drove all over the Intermountain West, installing playgrounds. And I was this young, impressionable guy. And yeah, I like this essay. So yeah, I just numbered it 1 through 3. Kind of has some vague advice at the beginning of each part, but it's really like, what this really is the closest I've come to writing a short story that is in essay form. And when I was writing this essay, I obsessed over short stories. I read many books on short stories and how they work, and I read many short stories, and I particularly read a lot of Rick Bass because I think he's like the best at what he does. And I made lists about like what makes something a short story and what makes something an essay. And really it's just like, is one true or not? Is one fictional? Except that I found that short stories have more scene than summary generally. And essays tend to have more summary than scene, generally. But there's totally exceptions to both. Think of the short stories of Borges, for instance. Those are all summary. Or I, Claudius. That's all summary. It's not a short story. Anyway, so I tried to write this as in scene as I possibly could. And I mean, I gave each one of the three brothers a monologue of a story that they would often tell. But I tried to reproduce those from memory as best I could, and they were always telling those stories. And so I really tried to play up the scene in this one. And I think it is, when it's kind of, I use a 3-act structure, if I recall correctly, kind of creating something, story like, short story like. But it's like true stuff. It's just, the thing is all these patterns are there. Like all the patterns of art and structures and things emerged from real life. So, you know. I like that one. I don't think that's ever been online, but it was in the Concho River Review. And its editor, Albert Haley, sent me a book of his that I looked at in the novel section. And I will read it someday. Home Ground. Oh, wow. I don't think I've ever shown this one to anyone. This is a weird one. But I think it's kind of important. It's kind of, dang it. The weird ones are the kind of the ones that have to be there. They're kind of key. They're doing something important, expressing something strange that's actually important. So one of those brothers mentioned in the previous essay was my sister's now ex-husband, who's really had like a crazy life. And anyway, this essay, like, he was someone who's like influence I like outgrew when things went down badly, and or thought I did, like, I don't know. Anyway, when I started this canoe trip around the circumference of Lake Powell, he gave me this really like amazing personal letter, and then I read it years and years later, like literally 20 years later, and had a totally different response to it because so much had happened since then. So I was like, what if I wrote him back now? So I do, but the way I do it is I start with a scan of his letter. I changed his name at the bottom. And start with a scan of his letter, and then I like provide context for that in my writing in a sort of prose poemish sort of way, lyric essay sort of way, lyric analytic essay. I move through it. And I'm also like, as it goes, I'm providing context for this letter that I'm going to send back in response. And then I do a handwritten letter also. And I know that's like not fun to read, a handwritten letter, having to puzzle it out. But, I think it's kind of an interesting idea to have a page of your work be handwritten. No hiding, And it makes this an epistolary chapter. Yeah, what are people going to make of this book? It's so strange. But this is kind of a key one. I mean, and I think it's something that probably a lot of people deal with. We all have influences in our life, and do they always remain perfect, or is there a lot of like disillusionment that comes in our life, and we have to reassess things? Then later you reassess the reassessing. That one was some lines back to someone. This one, The Silence Underneath the Rain-Down Bridge, really was written just for this book. However, there was an earlier version of this chapter that was like my writing school. So I did this canoe trip in 1999 and 2000. It was a 2,000-mile circumnavigation of the whole circumference of Lake Powell in a canoe. A friend came out and joined me for the middle, but most of it I did by myself. Though I really appreciate him coming out there. He made the trip possible overall because it like broke it up. It was like 3 parts: alone with someone and then alone again. Anyway, I had all this crazy stuff happen on this trip, and I always thought it could be a good book. And there's a big concept, like a big subject to study underneath it all: the damming of Glen Canyon and the creation of Lake Powell. Really, the creation of the birth of the modern environmental movement, and at the center of the water debate in the West, which is huge. Anyway, so over 6.5 months in 1999 and 2000, I went around this thing. Kept journals, really good journals. I had so many windbound days, like half the week sometimes, like I just can't canoe because it was so windy. The Coast Guard classifies Lake Powell as an inland ocean. before the Yangtze River was dammed in China and the Three Gorges Dam was built, it was the longest reservoir in the world. People often call it the most beautiful reservoir. Edward Abbey quipped, the Taj Mahal will be beautiful, half buried in water too. Now Lake Powell itself is mostly gone from climate change and water overallocation and drought, etc. in the West. It's literally like barely half there. Whole marinas are just gone that used to be there. And anyway, after that trip, I pretty quickly started trying to turn it into a book, like within a couple of years. And I typed up, had all my journals typed up, and tried to shape them into something. And it was really where I like learned to write. And I wrote this long, it was like a several 100-page book. It was a day-by-day account. It was about just the trip with tons of research. And I read so many books and dove so deep into the subject and really tried to find meaning in it. I had this idea of writing a subjective guidebook novel, like a completely useless novel or guidebook that was just one person's personal experience. It still makes me laugh. It's a funny idea. And that's kind of what this turned out to be. So it's structured a little bit like a guidebook, but this is so much shorter. I shortened it by skipping over passages, not entirely, but like just summarizing parts here and there. Not doing it every day and looking more for like larger arcs. So this is still a 200-page work. It's kind of a book within the book. But I was going to still just call it Once Around, but this was my alternate title. And my kids were like all about this title at the time. And I was driving them to school a lot and talking about what I was working on sometimes. And my daughter Anna was like, you have to use the title that sounds underneath the Rain Down Bridge, or I won't ever care about your book. I don't want my kids to read my book, but yeah. Okay. I do like that title and it's meaningful. But that book, I worked on it for years, like literally like I worked on Once Around for like 5 years. And, I liked it. I thought it was cool, but, I could barely get anybody to ever read it. It was very demoralizing. I couldn't like pay people to read it. I mean, I just hadn't found my audience, but it really like gave me a lot. And so when I wrote this chapter was unique in that it began in one form as an abridgment of all of that previous work. But it got way abridged and way rewritten. It's really its own thing now, even while it still hews to nonfiction. Contents: before Northwest Lake Powell, the Escalante Arm, Southwest Lake Powell, maps and interim maps, Southeast Lake Powell, the San Juan Arm and Navajo Mountain, Northeast Lake Powell, Narrow Cataract and Dirty Devil Canyons. After selected bibliography, index of Lake Powell Canyons. It begins in the middle and has in the middle and has at the end these visually formatted pages. They're kind of like, canoeing a little bit, flowing, eddies and streams and so on. That's the vibe it gives me. And it's mostly sentence fragments, I think, or all sentence fragments. And it just sets it apart from like the narrative stuff, and it's artful and cool. And then it gets to these sections. Coldest Night of 1999 or Northwest Lake Powell. Would you read that? Northwest Lake Powell or The Coldest Night of 1999? And then, yeah, every time it mentions a place on Lake Powell or part of Glen Canyon, it's bolded. It has sections. This is such a long part of the book. But it's really good. And I've actually gotten people to read this. Oh yeah, I made all these maps and put them in a section. I made them out of construction paper. And another legacy of working on that long book for a long time. I'm like, wow, I've got all these extras that I can bring into it, and they're mine. Original material. I think they look kind of cool. And if some publisher wants to clean them up a little bit with their magic little Photoshop biz, whatever. I don't care. Just do it. And then it has this interim section. So when I got to the south end of the lake, after paddling by myself, that's when I found out my friend was going to come join me. But I also wanted to go visit my friend who lived in Flagstaff, and so I hitchhiked there and had this whole little side adventure. And that's when I met Trace Joseph, the son of Alex Joseph, the FBI standoff guy. And I had other adventures. This section just got longer and longer, but it's that same thing. And then it's bookended by maps too from the next section. I like how these maps looked. I thought they were pretty cool. I always like my own work. Why make your work if you don't like it? You should be a fan of your own work. Otherwise, you're probably doing something wrong. It's okay. It's just a bunch of trash I made. Okay. We have here. Now we're back. Now Ray is there. My friend canoeing along with me. Having adventures. And there's really a lot of research put into this, as you will see at the end of this. I did some learnings and learned some things, and I put them into the book. Okay. Oh, yeah. Forgive me, but I've written a poem just now that's all the alternate titles of this piece's major sections, each one a specific image that represents in some way to me how this trip and this time felt. It's a poem really only for people who have read this essay. Wait, what? Its final stanza is a short poem I wrote in the back of an E. Cummings poetry book one day, while tied up to a buoy, when the water was peaceful and I was drinking cold water and feeling light. A rusted can worth serious cash. Coldest night of 1999. Icicles in a historic defile. Radio signals from half the country on a lake above a spire floating past. Mysterious lights with an earthly source. Curl of blacktop, sandbanked, shining hot. The silence underneath the rain-dawn bridge. Reading from 73 poems next to buoy number 74. If this long-form narrative essay has a thesis statement, it would be this poem. Just my life as a poem. I think Glen Canyon Dam should be decommissioned and Lake Powell should be drained, but that's not the only point I want to make here. I think solitude and nature and adventure should all be considered essential for any complete human life, if at all possible. So should cultivating a deeper awareness of the past and ever larger awareness of the present. Yeah, this book. I spent a lot of time with this book in different phases, even working on this chapter. This was like a year of my life. Oh, and then look, this has a 60-book bibliography. I read all these books. In this, and these are just, I read more than this. These are just the ones I recommend that illuminate this. And it has an index. And if there's any canyon that I didn't, index of Lake Powell canyons, bays, coves, and beaches not mentioned in the text will receive a few words here. Oh yeah, and I think those words make a secret poem, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Again, a subjective guidebook novel, because I thought that was funny. Yeah, 200 pages. And lots of words. I guess I just think it's cool to put symbols on a page that people can then interpret into ideas or images. I'm just kind of a freak like that. And I think the silence underneath the rain-down bridge is great. Have you ever had that experience of driving? And then suddenly you're under a bridge, and if it had been raining, it's like, wow. Anyway, there's a bridge that I canoed under. And I had a memory of canoeing under it when it was raining and it being quiet under there. I had this whole memory of it. But I've read in my journals both times going under it, and there was no mention of it raining, and I'm like, that I would have mentioned that. No. Weird. Now, chapter 16 is a retelling of that last book-length chapter, but in a very different way. Starts with an E. Cummings quote. Now is a ship which Captain Am sails out of sleep, steering for dream. And I wrote down all my dreams during those 6.5 months. And so I read through them all a bunch, studied them, and analyzed them and surveyed them, kind of retold the story of the trip, but of the story of the dreams that I had during that time. And it's very illuminating, I think. It's like, that's my young mind. Oh yeah, it's the only time I have horizontal images in the book. I have two, and they divide the three sections. And, oh yeah, here's the coup in this book. After all that, I found a dream from one of my ancestors from the early 1830s. I was able to quote it and end on this quote, and it was from near where I was. Just crazy. I dreamed I was traveling on a long journey, exceedingly rough and mountainous. The mountains were so steep in places that it required catching hold of bushes and rock to aid me in climbing. It seemed to me that I should never be able to reach the top of the mountain. Perseverance and patience enabled me to succeed finally in reaching the summit, from which I beheld a most beautiful country stretching out before me, covered with forests of various kinds of trees, interspersed with grass spots which looked like lawns. Upon these grass spots, deer and other wild animals were grazing. I've gotten a really good response to this essay when people have read it. Though a journal once offered to publish it, and they told me to cut it down significantly first. I was like, nah, see ya. Publication is not that important to me. I suppose there's a little wordplay in that title. Sense of an unnamed hill. You're also going to get a sense of an unnamed hill. This one's a visually formatted one, and it's also written entirely in sentence fragments. And it's about training to get ready for this hike across the country. It's the last one in this section titled West, where I was like back in the west half of the country after after Alaska, being north. So at first it starts with, you could say it's like a spiring mountain or something, but at first it starts with single word sentences. And all the sections are describing the same things. In some way, this is similar to The World Greening Wildly, in that it's like a subject that expands in how you tell it. A sense of an unnamed hill. And it's just me walking up and down this one hill, training for this walk across the country. Training was ultimately unnecessary and, so much less than needed. But then it all leads up to, this was my first experiment with visuals, I think. It gets more and more specific with each section, and then in the middle it's like, here's how specific you can be. A picture really is worth 1,000 words. And it leads up to this in a way. And it's back to long sentences, long sentence fragments. And then they get shorter again. So it's kind of like The World Greening Wildly, but in sentence fragments and visually formatted. That's weird. I never linked those two together. I think I wrote them at totally different times. I don't think about this chapter too much. It's good, and it's got some big themes that I need, and it's actually like got a lot of historic details for this one area, this ridge. And I think it's cool. I happened to work with someone at the School for the Blind who I thought was like a cool hipster. And she lived on that road. And I'm like, oh, I wrote something about that road. And I gave it to her, and she basically like never talked to me again. She was like, oh, it's good. There's nothing really scandalous in here. It's just kind of challenging, maybe. That was probably not a good sign. I don't know. I think it's good. I know it's good. Bunch of Philistines as these literary journals. They're really very conservative overall. I mean, just as far as their like lack of willing to take risks. Willingness. So it's the first 17 chapters between the three videos. There's still there's at least another video's worth of chapters, so maybe I'll wrap it up in 4. But this book's going to be so good. Shadows of Clouds on the Mountains. I've been working on it for 15 years now. It's a 60 chapter, 2 volume, 4,000 page maximalist American freakout. And it's going to be super cool. And I got to keep adding to this. I want to have elements of every chapter in this and potentially make a cover image. Joseph Cornell Shadowbox style, not the hat. Anyway, I want to write like a nonfiction Ulysses. I want to just like drop a nonfiction bomb that says like you can do anything with nonfiction. You just have to have truthful intent and like, you know, really do your best to be truthful. And life is just as literary as anything, and selection is just as creative an act as anything when you're choosing the details from life. Here's the real author of my book. My secret's out. Prisma, will you keep writing my book in a zany real life twist? I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll bet you. It's so windy outside. Cool. Here might snow soon. Sorry, neighbors, to film your lighted window, but it's just so iconic.